Hey everyone, it's Mike Huber. Thank you for listening to the Freshman Foundation podcast. Before we get started, I wanted to ask one simple question. Are you searching for the missing puzzle piece to unlock your potential? You train your body and physical skills for countless hours. Why don't you do the same for your mind? Mental performance coaching will help you get your mind out of the way and maximize your physical abilities. Visit michaelvhuber.com to schedule a free consultation to take the next step in finding your missing puzzle piece. Now let's get on to the podcast.
Welcome to the Freshman Foundation podcast, helping you make the jump from high school athletics to the collegiate level and beyond, with your host, Michael Huber.
How do you build confidence through curiosity? Welcome to the Freshman Foundation podcast, where we help young athletes become confident problem solvers in sport and life. In this episode, I sit down with Ed Garrity, speaker, author, and leadership development expert with 30 years of experience working with students, educators, and business leaders. We explored how to build sustainable confidence through curiosity and effort rather than fleeting confidence based on short-term results. Whether you're an athlete, coach, or parent, this episode is packed with practical tools and strategies to help Gen Z athletes build resilience and thrive under pressure. I'm excited for this conversation. Let's build your foundation with Ed Garrity. Hey, Ed, how are you?
Hey, Michael, great to see you.
Great to see you too. It's great to have you on my podcast. I was on your podcast yesterday we recorded, so we're doing back to back here. So I think to jump right in, tell me about your work in terms of helping people with developing their confidence, whether it's teens or just, adults.
Sure. And once again, Michael, thank you for the opportunity to be on here and to have the opportunity to spend some time with your listeners.
Mm-hmm.
For the past 30 years, Michael, one of the big messages that I've been talking with students and educators and business leaders is about, how do we build our confidence?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the big questions that has really evolved over the last several years is not just how do we build our confidence, but in working now more and more with parents, the big question I get from parents is how do we help our teen build their confidence, especially when they're getting pulled in so many different directions in social media and our fast-paced driven world. And so I think one of the important things that we can do to help our teens build their confidence is I think it's really important to really encourage them to be curious, Michael, to really be curious, to step outside of their comfort zone, to try new things, to take positive risks, because that's how they learn and that's how they grow. So many times I think we give this message to sometimes we give this message to our kids or kids hear this message, and that is that, go forth and follow your passion. And I don't think it's passion first, Michael. I think it's actually curiosity first. I think one of our great responsibilities as parents is to encourage our child to really be curious, not just through elementary, middle school, high school, but to be curious throughout life.
Yeah, I love that. And curiosity is definitely something that I'm very big on in terms of for myself individually as personal development, but also coaching, athletes myself, young athletes myself. So I think there's a couple of things in there that are really important, right? Like curiosity to me comes before passion, right? How do you know what you're passionate about unless you understand what's out there, right? And it's not just that one thing, right? There's a lot of things that are out there that you could really be passionate about if you ask the right questions. I think the other thing that curiosity leads to is empathy, right? If we try all these different things and we take those risks and we know what it is to fail, now it's a lot easier to relate to other people when they do the same thing versus I have to be perfect and I expect them to be perfect. And now we've got this sort of disconnect, right? So can you talk about empathy? Is that something that, is big in your work?
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, because I think that when you do explore, you do try new things, you get the empathy and you get some compassion for even appreciation for example, if I think it's really important to you encourage your child to explore as many different things. They get music, art, sports, dance, all of that. And so let's say you expose your child to playing the piano Well, then maybe they try it out and they realize that it's really not something that they're really excited about or that they're really interested in after they tried it out. But now, because they tried it out, to your point, Michael, they now have such an appreciation for someone who then sits down and plays the piano masterfully, and or they have a classmate or a peer. They're like, wow, it's not as simple as it looks. And so I
Absolutely.
think that's where it comes from. You get an appreciation of other people's unique talents and gifts. And that's the whole idea of encouraging our child to be curious, not all throughout life, is that's how they start to discover their own unique abilities and strengths, and how we're all unique and different.
Yeah. So like, what are some of the ways you guide or teach or instruct or suggest specifically to teens about taking risks in terms of trying new things that may be uncomfortable, that may make them look silly, right? For lack of a better way to put it, but understanding like, hey, there's a really good reason why, and this is why you should try it.
Yeah, I think that kind of leads into that. We're such a goal-driven society, and we're all about producing results. That I think when we encourage ourselves and we encourage our child to be curious, then we can start to really teach the lesson that it's about how important it is to really focus and celebrate on the effort and not the result. And I think when you get into that conversation of being curious, then it can start to take the focus away from the result of what are we trying to achieve, because you're just exploring into being curious, to, wow, look at the effort you put in trying that out. I'll
Yeah.
even give you an example, even with our daughter, our younger daughter. Even when she was we try to expose both of our kids to different activities, but with our daughter, we exposed her, to the sports track of soccer, of basketball, of even lacrosse. And it just wasn't something that she was really interested in. And then she started we saw that she was drawing a lot, and we saw that she was coloring a lot and sketching a lot. So we started to feed that fire. And then as we started to feed that fire. And how did we feed that fire? Getting the sketchbooks, getting the right tools for her to be able to explore it fully. And then from there, realizing that she was then excited more about the arts. And so as soon as there was an opportunity for a local production, a local play in our area, we took her to that play so that she get exposed to that. And it's all those trial and errors of her trying things and exploring. She's be able to found something that she's found her unique ability. And then within that now is the journey of her celebrating, going for auditions, not getting the part, realizing congratulations on the effort on that. I know you worked really hard for that part. I know you didn't get it, but it's that whole Jim Rohn quote, right? It's not about the goal. It's about who you become and what you experience in the way towards that goal.
Absolutely. Character building, right? That's a
Yes.
big part of what we do, right? Regardless of the population you work with, like coaching is about character building. You're going to fail. You're going to fall on your face. I did want to ask you a question here because it's something that I'm interested in. You mentioned goals, right? Like, so what are some of the biggest mistakes people make when they set goals?
I think one of the biggest mistakes that sometimes, especially even as teenagers, is we make the mistake of it's not really being realistic in terms of the timetable that we set. We underestimate what we can do in a year, and we overestimate what we can do in a year, and we underestimate what we can do in 5 years. Isn't that the saying, Michael?
I don't know it, but it makes sense.
So I think that sometimes we have a tendency to not set realistic goals, and knowing that is it smart, right? Is it specific, manageable, attainable, realistic? The whole timetable, all that. And I think that's a key area to helping build our teens' confidence too, and building the confidence of others. Is that one of the ways you can build your confidence is by setting realistic, small, measurable goals at first. So you start to build up that confidence, that momentum as you go forward and say, look, I can do these things.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I mean, goal setting is certainly something that I do a lot with athletes, and what I sort of, and I talk about SMART goal frameworks and things like that, and really like I challenge them to think about what it would be like to define success differently, right? Like, is success doing all those things that I can control and feeling really good about that, knowing that the outcomes that I'm setting for myself are not in my control completely. So like if I can wake up every day and go, I check that box every single day in service of this long-term goal. And even if I don't get there, I can still look back and go, hey, I worked really hard for this. Like going back to what you were just saying, right? Like building character. I worked really hard to get to this point. And yeah, you know what? It didn't work out the way I wanted to, but I could still like look myself in the mirror, you know, straight in the face and say I did everything I could versus that feeling of regret, right? When we set a goal for ourselves, but we don't do everything we can do. And now that's something you have to live with forever, right? And so like I think it's something that sometimes is hard for young people to understand and appreciate when they're a certain age because of the world we live in. And so I know yesterday we talked about a little bit about the idea of perfectionism, right? And I couldn't help but think about perfectionism as it relates to curiosity, right? That idea of like, hey, your daughter, the story you just told about your daughter, where you kind of observed her going down a different path and you fueled that fire because that's what made her happy. I think what happens a lot of times with perfectionism is we funnel kids into, say, sports, for example, because that's a relevant topic. We funnel them into sports and we make them feel like that's the only way to feel good about themselves, or that's the only way to be successful, or this is what my parents want for me. And so I have to be good at it or else I have this feeling of failure and I'm letting them down. Right. And that's where I think, I wouldn't, there's no scientific straight line, but like, I think they're related. Right. And so like curiosity could be the offset to perfectionism, I guess is a way to put it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because we do live in this world where we only see people on the podium.
Mm-hmm.
We only see people when they're getting recognized for first place, winning the championship, and you don't always see the behind the scenes of all the effort that it took to get there. Mm-hmm. I think that goes back to the point too, right, Michael? If you celebrate the effort over the result, then you're teaching that life skill of not striving for perfectionism. Because if you are just focused on the goal, and if it's just about the goal and like being number one or being number one, then you're setting yourself up into that spiral of just all perfectionism. Like it's all just about the goal. It's just about the goal. I did some work with a program out of Canada called Strategic Coach. And one of the skills that they talked about in that training that I participated in was, one of the ways you can keep forward momentum and keep building that confidence is by doing something that they taught called positive focus. And positive focus is just a simple exercise that you can do at the end of every day. I do it at the end of every week. Every week I do a positive focus. Actually, my wife and I, we do this every week faithfully. And what that is, we write down 10 things, positive things that happened that week. It can be personal and professional. So we just mix them all up. And sometimes it's more than 10. But what were the positive things that happened that week, personally and professionally, for not just myself, but for our family? And then what happens is that you look at that and then you're like, wow, look how much we've accomplished. And then you can go and then you take those highlights from the week and you turn them into highlights for the month. And those highlights for the month become the highlights for the year. And then you can say, look how far we have come. And in our fast-paced world, we don't take that time for reflection to say, look how far we've come.
Well, yeah. I mean, listen, I can relate to that on a personal level and I'm sure you probably can relate to this what I'm about to say is as a business owner, as somebody who has a passion for this business and serving young people and their families, right? I've worked really hard for the last 4.5, 5, 6, 7 years to make that something that I think is worth sharing with other people. And some days I don't get the results that I think I deserve, right? Like, I should have more clients. I should be doing more. Why is this so hard? And you don't realize I have to look back at the day I started the business where I had a big zero next to the amount of money that I was making. And today I'm not rich by any stretch of the imagination, but that number is a lot bigger than zero, right? And so like, I have to remind myself, like, you're doing the right things. You're moving in the right direction. You've done so many positive things. Don't judge yourself because the outcome's not what you want it to be yet, right? Not right now. And I think that's so, so important, whether you do it once a week or you do it once a day or you do it once a month or once a year. That ability to reflect on the good things and not always the things that we're not good at is actually really, really hard.
It is. It's really hard, and then some people will dismiss it and say, "Oh, that's just toxic positivity. You're just focusing on the popcorn and the balloons and the unicorns." And no, that's not what we're talking about. We're actually just talking about, well, because it's that whole, what you focus on, you attract. Where your attention goes, your energy goes. And so if you're going to focus on either what's working or what's not working, it's not to just say, "Oh, everything's all perfect and great," but one of the ways you can have the energy to focus to deal with what's not working in your life is to have the energy and the fuel to know, actually, I'm doing really well here, which I think that leads into the next point, Michael, that you and I have talked about before, is that, so yeah, positive focus, celebrating the effort over celebrating the effort over over the result itself. But I think that one of the ways you can continue to anchor that is by positive self-talk.
Yes.
It's saying, you know what, look how far I've come today. Wow, look what I did today. Using those I am statements that are so powerful. I was golfing the other week with my friend, and this third person joined us for the round, and from the first hole to the 18th hole, every time this person took a putt and they missed the putt, they'd call themselves an idiot. You stupid. How could you do that? Oh, it was actually draining by the end of the 18 holes to hear this guy just continue to just bash himself about how terrible he was as a golfer. And he wasn't even a bad golfer, but you would have thought he was, the way he talked to himself. So positive self-talk, I think, is such a key, and that's something that we can teach our children, but we also have to use it as adults. Sometimes I think as adults, we think it sounds kind of funny to say, I am capable, I am strong, I am getting better every day. Yeah. But the studies show that has an impact on your immune system, on your stress, on your self-esteem, all of that.
Yeah. Well, I love the golf example because I relate to that personally, right? Like, as somebody who was always an athlete growing up his whole life, I was never great at anything, but I was always pretty good at sports in general. And then I started playing golf later in life as an adult, maybe around 30. And I was so hard on myself when I first started playing. I was like, oh, I should be able to do this. Why is this, I stink? And then eventually I was like, you play golf 5 times a year or 10 times, even 10 times a year. How could you expect to be really good at a sport where you don't play every single day? Right. So I had to accept that realization of hey, yeah, you know what? It sucks to miss a putt, but why should I make it? If I don't practice it every day, if I just show up 5 or 6 times a year, accept it, have fun, try to get better, try to make the next one, try to learn something new and move on. Right. And I think that happens a lot with self-talk is we have these sort of lofty expectations for ourselves and we think we should be able to do everything perfectly. And we're not able to look at it and go, why should I be able to be this good right now? There's no evidence to support that. Right. And self-talk can tie, like you said, back to the effort. Hey, I tried really hard. I gave everything I could. I showed up with a smile on my face and I worked hard. What's wrong with using that as the basis for that positive self-talk versus I'm basing my self-talk on the result. I'm an idiot. I'm a moron. I should have missed that putt. I should have made that putt. I suck, right? Why do we base it on the results and not the effort and focus and the things we can control? I think it's really interesting that happens.
Yeah, I think that's just a reflection of how we are just a very goal-oriented driven, it's all about results.
Yeah.
And so you have to counter that.
Yes.
The other part of that positive self-talk is also, sometimes you say the positive, I am happy, I'm happy, or I'm capable, I'm strong. Well, it's only part of it, because where the frustration comes into play is that you can say I'm capable, I'm strong, I'm getting better and better every day. But then you have to then put it into action too, because then it just becomes, it gets stuck. And so then it's not just a one thing positive stuff. Okay, I am successful. I'm going to do great. You can't just get up in the morning and say, I'm going to do great on this test. I'm going to put my best effort on this test and then not have studied the night before. So you have to do both, because it's that mind, body, action alignment. Your words have to match it's the words, actions, habits. You know?
So it's interesting you say that, because actually one of the things I will do with certain athletes, and I don't know that it's for everybody sometimes, but I try to guide them towards some affirmation, right? I am something that I want to be. And what I tell them is it's important to look at it, look forward and say I can do this. I am this, right? Maybe even if I'm not, but if I truly don't believe what I'm saying to myself, what I'm affirming, it could backfire on me. Right. So like when you set those affirmations, I say, hey, make them manageable, make them small, make them based upon your effort. Right. Like I'm going to work hard today. I'm a hard worker. Right now, all of a sudden, like I am a hard worker. Like you are a hard worker because you have complete control over that. Right. Versus I am a success. Well, if I don't define what success is to myself and I just say success and I assume it's something that's outcome based, right? If I don't have an outcome type success, I'm going to feel bad about myself. And then I'm going to be like, screw it. I'm not going to do anything about it. Right. I'm going to just move on to the next thing. So it is a really, and I think the word that I wrote down while you were talking is we are rewiring our brains. Some of it I think is biological and a lot of it is social, right? We're raised in a way that everything is so outcome oriented that we've been taught over 10, 15, 20, 25 years, especially when we're teenagers, right? We're only on the earth for a short amount of time. If that programming has been from day one, outcome, 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 college scholarship, starting position, professional sports, and it's all based on these outcomes that we can't completely control. Now we've got to undo that, right? We got to feed in the other stuff to sort of try to balance it as much as possible.
Absolutely. And I think another part of that too, Michael, is that as we talk about positive self-talk and those affirmations, we model that also for our children, for our kids. Not, and when I say children, I mean all across the board, middle school, high school, college, even as adults. So we model that for our children. And one of the things when we model that for our children, when they see us doing the positive self-talk and they see us saying, you know what, okay, this didn't, maybe we went to get a reservation, went to go to dinner, and there was no availability for seating. How I respond even to the fact of going to a restaurant and we can't get into the restaurant. How I respond to that? My kids are watching me. Yes. And then they're going to say, how is dad going to deal with that upset? And so they're going to watch that. We talked earlier about compassion and about having compassion for ourselves and also having compassion, empathy for others. And we get that empathy by realizing, some people have different gifts and talents than we have. But I think when we model that self-talk to our kids, what we also are teaching our kids is that idea of self-acceptance. That it's not about perfection, it's about progress. That it's not about being perfect, it's about being yourself, being your true authentic self.
Yeah, I think the modeling is so critical and it's interesting, right? You're a parent and I'm a parent, and I think sometimes, I'll just speak for myself here. Like I definitely am conscious of saying things in a parental way, meaning like, hey, like I'm going to say it like under the assumption that I know better than you do. Right. Versus because even if it's true, right. Even if I'm about to tell my child is true, it's like I'm trying to tell them how to live their lives. Whereas like if I model that behavior, right. If I show up and I can't get the table, or something doesn't go the way I wanted to, or I'm driving my car and someone cuts me off and I act that way, like I'm giving them permission to act like dad, like you're basically like you're saying, right? And so I think it's really important, to be able to show that to kids. And I think sometimes there is a disconnect, right? Do as I say, not as I do. I think we still kind of live in a world where that's an acceptable parental behavior.
Sure. And it made me also think of the fact too, Michael, when we talk about parenting and modeling for our kids. And I'm sure there are some listeners here that are saying, great, be a great role model to my kids. Well, and they may be saying, well, great, I haven't been that great of a role model to my kids. I've had upsets and I've been angry and I've done all these things. You know what? So have I. It's like, I think that's really an important thing to remember, especially when we're raising teens. And we talk a lot about, having compassion for others. We need to be gentle with ourselves too. And as parents.
Yes.
And so I think it's easy as parents to sometimes beat ourselves up to say, I wasn't home more, or I should have been more patient, or I wish I could have given them this opportunity and I didn't. We all make mistakes, and we all, there's not one manual on how to be a parent. Everyone's trying to figure it out. Which goes back to the point of like, I think that the more authentic and the more present and the more real you can be with your teenager. And so just kind of say, hey, you know what? I'm on this journey with you. I don't have it all figured out. And then when you make a mistake, that you teach them that lesson and say, hey, you know what? the other day when you came into the room and you told me how you wanted to go to the dance, and I was like, absolutely not. There's no
Mhm.
dances this weekend. You're not going out with it. I overreacted without even hearing the whole story. And so I'm sorry that I acted that way.
Yeah. Right. Well, I was just about to go there and you sort of put the word out, sorry, right? Apologizing, taking responsibility, holding ourselves accountable as parents. I was talking about this yesterday, I think with somebody else. I don't think it was with in our conversation, but the idea of as a parent, like if I mess up and I know I mess up, like that ability to go to my kid, even though they're my child and I'm the parent, to say, hey, listen, I messed up, right? I'm sorry. I had something else going on, or I was mad about something else and I took it out on you, or that just made me feel a certain way. So I got upset, right? I'm human. I make mistakes, right? But to acknowledge it and to also like humble yourself to say, hey, I don't know everything, kid, like I can make mistakes too. And I'm going to show you that it's okay to make a mistake and apologize for it so that you have permission to go do that when you do versus, hey, I always have to be right and I can't admit when I'm wrong, which is to me, like, that's just a personal pet peeve of mine. Humility is just so important, right? Like in terms of development as a person, if you think you know everything, you're not going to have curiosity. You're probably going to be a perfectionist and you're probably going to have a pretty hard, life with some pretty negative self-talk, right? And
Yeah,
it's a
absolutely.
hard life to live, right? Like everybody goes through their own experience, but it's a hard life to live when you're constantly beating up on yourself.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the reasons why I think oftentimes people do beat themselves up is that we get caught up into this comparison game. We start
Yes.
comparing ourselves to how we see how other parents are maybe acting with their kids, and we think, oh, look at the relationship they have. I wish I had a relationship like they did. And it's all we start once we start comparing any of those things. It's a rabbit hole of scarcity and of lack, and then
Mm-hmm.
you start to no longer look for what's working. You look for now what's not working. But to go back to your point too, Michael, about that idea of, you know, when we say I'm sorry and when we make a mistake, we're not just teaching the lesson of humility, but we're also teaching a credible lesson about being accountable and being
Mm-hmm.
responsible for our words and for our actions and saying, hey, you know what? I'm accountable for what I said and for what I didn't say and for what I
Mm-hmm.
did or I didn't do. And we can teach them that taking responsibility and for their life and for their actions. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's such an important skill to teach our teenagers and to teach our children is that how do we teach them to be responsible and to be independent? And I think one of the just even simple things you can do to just help them get that a little bit, learn that responsibility, that independence is just fun things. You could depend. It's all age appropriate, right? But
Yes.
you could have your child say, you know what, you're responsible for making dinner Friday night. You and your siblings are responsible for making dinner. Well, what are we going to make? You're in charge. Here's $50. Here's, go and you got a dinner for the 6 people, however it is, right? Or you have them plan a trip, or if they're old enough, you help them get online with you and buy an airline ticket and show them how to buy an airline ticket.
Mm.
All those little different things. How to buy a ticket at a concert. You want to go to a concert? All right, let's go online together and buy. Instead of doing it for them, like let me show you how to do a load of laundry, a load of wash. Um, I really my son's a sophomore in college, and he said, Dad, I had like 3 friends come up to me at college and didn't even know how to run a washer and dryer. They had no clue on how to do it. So that teaching that responsibility, that
Yes.
independence is important, and it starts with you leading by example and modeling it too.
Those are really good examples. I mean, some of those things I've done as a parent, and some of those things I've never even thought to do, right? And I totally agree with you, right? Like, hey, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's more about learning and experiencing how to do it and the curiosity and the ability to make yourself uncomfortable. And those are really low risk things, right? To be able to do to start to get them to think that way of like, hey, I can try new things and it is fun. And yeah, maybe it didn't go perfectly, but hey, this is really cool that I got to experience this new thing. And I think, in the world that I live in specifically with young athletes, I think that is a challenge for a lot of parents. They want to dictate their child's experience, whether it's talking to a coach or dictating to the young person what they need to do and sort of running the show. Their ability or willingness to take their hands, like I say, take their hands off the wheel, sort of let them drive the car metaphorically is really important. But I think it's really hard for parents because they don't want to see their kids stumble. They don't want to see them waste time. They want to see them achieve their outcome goals, right? I want to play a sport in college. I want to get a scholarship. If this doesn't go perfectly this year, like I'm going to set myself back or I'm not going to be able to do that versus, hey, let's see how this goes. And if that doesn't work out, maybe there was a reason for it and that's okay.
Yeah, I'll give you even a personal example to that of when our son was playing lacrosse early on in high school, and he wasn't really happy with how like the playing time that he was getting, and so he was complaining about it a lot to me and to my wife, and then finally it was kind of like, okay, well then what do you need to do to get more playing time? And he was like, well, I'm not really sure. I don't really know. I just got to just be better, I guess, or I should be playing. And so it was really that empowering him to say, then my wife was like, well, maybe we should go talk to the coach. And I'm like, no, we're not going to go talk to the coach. No. And then she got it quick too, understood that pretty quick that no, he has to go talk to the coach and say, hey, coach, can I set it? And not just coach, is there a time that I can meet with you after practice sometime this week? So that you teach that life skill too. Hey, coach, is there a time that I can meet with you today or tomorrow to talk to you about a couple things? Sure. And so then you're teaching them another life skill. Once again, being responsible for their life, being responsible for what they're up to.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly as a dad, I believe that as a coach to young athletes, I'm a big advocate of that. And it's like you said, it's not just the conversation. It's the asking for the time, sending an email to set up an appointment, walking in the door, sitting across and looking your coach in the eye and having a conversation and preparing for that conversation, knowing it's going to be hard and stressful and anxiety inducing because you're 16 or 17 or 18 years old and your coach is a grown up and he holds your fate seemingly in your hands. How am I going to handle it when my coach tells me something I don't want to hear? Am I going to get angry? Am I going to drop my head? Am I going to cry? Am I going to, right? Like, and maybe those things happen because we're human, but if we prepare for it and we kind of see it and we know what we want to get across and we know how we think about how we might react in those situations, now all of a sudden I'm prepared for an adult conversation, which if nothing else gives a sense of self-esteem and self-respect and builds character for a young person that they're going to feel good about, even if they don't get more playing time. Hey, right. I was able to do this. Look at me. Like I acted like an adult. That's pretty cool. Right.
Yeah, I think when you do hard things, when you do challenging things like that, you can't help but develop that resilience and that perseverance, that grit. And that's the thing too, right, Michael? You and I here in the work that we do, right, and peak performance and leadership development. There's such that focus on terms of being driven and work really hard, but I think sometimes we forget we have to teach that growth, that we get caught up in the idea of how important it is to be resilient, to persevere, but we forget to remind ourselves and to remind our children is that perseverance and resilience does not come from our easy wins and the small victories. It really comes when we take a setback and we turn it into a great comeback, and we take an obstacle and we turn it into a great opportunity. And so the question is, how do you teach that to your kid? Well, you model it, you example it, you give examples of it, because there are examples all around us, from sports to music to medicine to education, of people doing incredibly inspiring things in the world and have overcome great odds. So when you got to pay attention for those, they're all around us. So oftentimes if I come across an article online or an inspirational like video, I'll send that to my kids. I'll send it to my friends, so that it's a reminder of like the perseverance, the growth mindset, as Carol Dweck talks about, that we can always go farther than we think we can. And it's such an important trait to have.
Yeah. And so that you mentioned leadership, and leadership is not something that I would consider myself to be expert in. It's not something I talk a lot about. I mean, some clients certainly have the desire to be better leaders, and we can work through that, but it's not something that I necessarily put a ton of focus on. So like, can you talk about that? Like what are some of the qualities of high performing leaders?
Sure. I think we've touched upon them, right? I think great leaders are curious. I think great leaders do focus not just on the result, but on the effort. And I think that great leaders do take the time to focus on what's working and that positive momentum going forward. I think great leaders are resilient, and they know how to persevere. I think another big quality that great leaders have, Michael, is that they really practice a daily art of gratitude, a deep appreciation for their abilities, for the opportunities that lie before them, and for the people in their life. And I think that when we live and lead our lives with gratitude, it's then we can have the right kind of attitude to deal with the ups and downs and the challenges that we face, not just in school, but in life. And now it's really amazing in the world of in science is that now they're doing the studies that actually just show that being
Mm-hmm.
grateful is not just a nice thing to say, or being kind is not just the right thing to do, but the studies are showing how in a biochemical way
Yes.
it changes the physiology of our body. It changes the brain chemistry of our body.
Yeah. I love gratitude, and I follow along with that science, at least on the periphery. And gratitude is a performance, for me, is a performance strategy that I will suggest to young people. And some of them kind of like roll their eyes at it for, metaphorically, like, I don't get it. But every once in a while, I'll get an athlete who gets it. I worked at a high school, of all boys, Catholic high school. And so the kids there tended to be a little bit more faith, into their faith than typical, which I use that with athletes who are of faith. I use that as a driver, right? Like that idea of, hey, there's something bigger out there, right? It's not just me. I'm not the only person in the universe, right? And so I had this one kid who was really struggling in baseball, and I knew he was into his faith, and I just said, hey, in your routines, like when you go to the plate, just tell yourself thank you. Like just say thank you to yourself. Like, hey, I get to play baseball, right?
Yeah.
Like this is not something everybody gets to do. It's a privilege, and I'm lucky to do it. And it helped take some of that pressure off. Like, hey, like this is really cool. I get to do this. Like not everybody gets to do it, and there's something bigger. So like, hey, just go with it. And I think that that's a really important thing. I think gratitude is a really hard thing for people to buy into, because we live in a culture of scarcity, right? The world we live in is inherently like, I don't have enough. I never have enough. I need more. And that idea that I'm grateful, just these little things every single day, is like, it seems trivial, but it's not, right? And we know now scientifically that changes the way, our bodies and our minds work.
Yeah, and I think what happens is, right, in the world of advertising that we live in the world that we live
Yes.
in with advertising, it's like advertising is all about what are you missing, what are you not good at, what
Mm-hmm.
are you, the fear of missing out, lack, scarcity, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So it just feeds into that. And so the big question then is, well, then how do you foster more gratitude in your life? And I think one of the first things you can do to foster more gratitude into your life is that you first of all need to put yourself into the present moment, because we live in we it's
Mm-hmm.
just so easy, and it's just so easy to get caught up into the past
Mm-hmm.
or to get pulled into the future, that we miss out on what's happening right now, this very moment. And really the daily practice and art of gratitude, it has to start with you being in the present moment, because
Yes.
that's where it begins. And so to be in the present moment, well, then the next question then is, and then how do you be in the present moment? And the studies have been done now that shows that one of the first things you can do to get into the present moment is to be aware and conscious of your breath. And if you can get really conscious of your breath and taking that time to really get
Mm-hmm.
centered and calm. Now, once I'm in
Yeah.
the present moment, now I can say, okay, what am I grateful for in my life right now? And then someone says, well, I'm not grateful for anything. Well, let's pretend that you're grateful for something. What if you could be grateful for something? Or what would others be grateful for, do you think, in their life? And then you try to get into that conversation of like, I always challenge my audiences, every night before you go to bed, just ask yourself one last question. What are 5 things that you're grateful for about today?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they're small things, sometimes they're big things, but it will reframe the day, and
Yes.
it will set you up to win the next one. So
Yeah.
being in the present moment, being aware of your breath, another great skill that I've really I practice, and it's something that I teach, and I've shared it with our children, and that is that a consistent practice of journaling, of
Yes.
taking the time to journal, and just no one else is reading it. It's just your thoughts, your collective streaming
Mm-hmm.
of just whatever's on your mind, and then you can turn that into a gratitude journal in
Yes.
itself by ending at each entry with what am I grateful for,
Yeah.
or what are the things that I'm looking forward to. Once again, focusing on the effort, not the result.
Mm-hmm.
But the power of journaling is another way that we can foster more gratitude. And then just taking the practice of taking the time to write a letter to a loved one, the
Mm.
letter, making a phone call to someone, and just expressing your gratitude to them. It's so important.
Yeah, all those things, right? And I think, we've just had a couple of conversations, but everything you just said, right, about those tools and techniques and strategies, right? The breathing to be in the present moment, the journaling, the gratitude, those are all things that like are central to my work. And I love that, right? Like to see somebody else being able to apply that in a different context, maybe a little bit with their
Yeah.
family. And it's like, it just makes you feel good. Like, hey, you know what? Like these things do work and they're not hard things, right? They're simple things, but we need to do them consistently to get the most out of it, right? And the fact that you're sort of sharing that, and you've been coaching and consulting for a lot longer than I have. So it's nice to know that somebody with more experience is saying, hey, like these are the things we need to do. And they're not hard, but we got to do them because it's going to change the way we look at the world. And ultimately it's going to change the way we show up and perform, which is huge. So I think, as we start to wind down a little bit, I wanted you to have a chance to talk about your book. It's called Shine Your Light. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. I came out with the book. My new book is Shine Your Light, Navigate Your Way to a Life You Love. And I talk about how do we, become more confident? How do we achieve our goals? How do we get inspired to reach out and really make a difference? It kind of ties into the point you just made, Michael. Like, and the whole analogy, it's a whole ocean sea analogy that I do throughout the book with metaphors. And one of it is the lighthouses, that we have lighthouses in our life that can guide us to navigate our way to a life that we love. So everyone's definition of living a life they love is different, right? Everyone's path in life is different. But I do think that there are lighthouses that are consistent among everybody's journey that we need to kind of keep as guideposts as we navigate our way to a life that we love. And one of those lighthouses being gratitude, another lighthouse being respect and responsibility, another lighthouse being kind to others. And so I really wrote this book as a culmination of my 30 years of work with students and educators and business leaders, and also as a manifesto to my kids, just as a legacy piece for them to kind of say, hey, this is how Dad tried to live his life, and this is what he also tried to share with others.
I see. I love that. And then we talked a little bit about that before I hit the record button. And I love that, right? Like, yes, it's for other people. Yes, it's to share that advice and your experience and your wisdom with other people so that they can get it from, but also that idea that it is a sort of a culmination of all your work and a legacy for your children in sort of one place, which I think is really, really cool. And certainly the idea of writing a book is pretty attractive. I think there's also something in there that I took that we haven't talked a lot about, but I think it's important is, lighthouses. I thought the word beacon, right? Like beacons, right? Values, right? So identity and values, like how does that sort of play into your work? Just to kind of touch on that a little bit.
Our values and our values play such a huge role in our identity. There's been some studies that have shown that, by the age of 7, we've already acquired a set of beliefs about how to navigate the world, and that are set in, that are kind of like set in place. And what some studies have shown is that 60%, 70% of those beliefs and those values, those beliefs are negative. They're actually limiting beliefs. So we actually need to kind of reprogram and rechange some of those limiting beliefs going forward, because otherwise it doesn't matter how positive we think, unless we go back to like those limiting beliefs and those, and being really clear on what our values are and what really matters are. Then that's when we get kind of lost and we get kind of fragmented, we get overwhelmed, we get anxious, and we start to go down that rabbit hole of comparison.
Yeah. And to tie that back to the very beginning of our conversation about confidence, right? For me, right, curiosity is a big part of confidence, right? Like from what you had, shared with us. For me, it's also about knowing who you are, what you value, right? If I know who I am, and I talk to kids about this all the time, if I know what I value, I know what's important, I know who I am as a person, I know what I stand for, then my performance to the rest of the world isn't going to matter as much because I know what I gave. I know what I did. I know who I am and what I stand for. And what somebody else thinks about me isn't as important versus like, if I don't know what I believe, I don't know what I stand for, I don't know what my values are. Now, all of a sudden I'm looking for validation from the outside because I don't have clarity about what's important to me and who I am. And I think that that's really, really important to start to develop at a young age, right? Because like you said, like just scientifically, right, we were already starting to see like those values generated at a very young age. You've got to then break those patterns and start to challenge kids to think about like, what is important to me? What do I stand for? What do I want in my life? And what's important? Then they could start to make friends. They could start to align themselves with people in their lives that have those same values. And now you could set yourself up for success in the future.
It's so true. The more you can honor your own true self, the more you can become your most authentic self, is then you're able to show your true self to the whole world and help others. But you know what that takes, Michael? It takes work, and it takes intention, and it takes attention.
Yeah.
So what do you mean by work? It means taking the time to listen to podcasts. It means taking the time to read the books. It means taking the time to journal. It means taking the time to be present in conversations, to really be engaged, to really be a real listener. All of those play such a huge role in us being able to keep living and leading a life that we love.
I love that. All right, I'm gonna leave it there. I'm gonna ask you one last question, and I normally ask you ask me one last question, and I usually ask one question, and it's different. But I'm gonna turn the tables. If you had a billboard at the side of the road, and you could put one thing on that billboard for everybody to see, what would it be?
You know, I feel like I wish I had a weekly billboard, because I feel like I could change it weekly, actually maybe even daily. But I think I think the message I would put out there on that billboard right now would be gentle with yourself, so that you can be gentle and kind to others. I just think we live we just live in a high-paced world right now, fast-paced world, where it's just easy to beat ourselves up. And I think that's something that I've had to work on in my life, is just that idea of not just be gentle with yourself, that you're right where you're supposed to be, and that you don't have to have it all figured out and all planned out. You know, I do a lot of work with seniors, and I do a lot of work with people making transitions into different parts of their life. And seniors going into college is a very overwhelming time, because even our daughter right now is going through that process. And one of the things that I share with her is just that, you know what, you don't have to have it all figured out, and you don't have to have it all planned out. And if you do, great. And if you decide to change it, guess what? That's okay too. It's your life. You know, the biggest mistake that you can ever make is to live someone else's goal, is to live someone else's dream. You know, I'll give you a quick example, Michael. I speak at a university. I speak at Fordham University every year in New York, at the Lincoln Center campus and at their Rose Hill campus. And I help welcome all the first-year students into their orientation there at Fordham. And I've been speaking there for over two decades. And at one of those orientations, I'll never forget, a senior orientation leader walked up to me, and he goes, "Excuse me," he goes, "but you're Ed Garrity." I go, "Yeah." He goes, "I remember you." He goes, "You spoke in my orientation when I was a freshman here at Fordham." I go, "You remember that?" He goes, "Yeah, absolutely." He goes, "You actually brought me up on stage and you had me do this whole goal setting thing from I want to I will. Because when you get clarity, you get power. And when you get clarity and power, you have focus. And when you get clarity, power, and focus, you're confident, you're unstoppable." And I was like, "That's so cool. You remember that?" He goes, "Yeah." I go, "Do you remember what your goal was?" He said, "Absolutely." He said, "I will be an Oscar award-winning director here in New York City by the age of 35. And I was like, "Wow, that's so great." I go, "So are you still studying film here at Fordham?" And he looked right at me, Michael, and he laughed and he went, "No." He said, "I started out in film, and the more I got involved with film here, I realized it wasn't so much film that I was excited about." Go back to the curious thing we talked about earlier, right, Michael? He goes, "I started to realize it wasn't so much film that I was excited about. It was music." And then he explained to me, the more he explored music, the more curious he became about music, to realize that's what he really wanted to build his life around. I'm like, "Well, that's great." I go, "So what's your new goal now?" He goes, "My new goal now, I will have my own music production company here in New York City by the age of 35, representing the top hip artists in the world." "Good for you," I said. I go, "So what are you doing right now to get closer to that goal?" He goes, "Well, right now I have an internship with Sony in their international marketing department." Good for you. And that point is that he would never have got to here, right, Michael, if he had never started way over here. So I think it's just important to remember that, you know, you're right where you are supposed to be, to, you know, be present, and then circle the wagons. What really matters? What's most important to you? Be curious, you know, celebrate the effort, and be responsible, and be kind, and be grateful.
It's great. Ed, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. It was a wonderful conversation. Hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Thanks, Michael. And I really appreciate what you do, and the keep on shining your light to the world. You're making a difference.
Thank you so much, Ed. So, what's your biggest takeaway from my conversation with Ed Garrity? My biggest takeaway from this episode is that sustainable confidence is directly linked to authenticity. Ed shared, the more you can honor your true self, the more you can become your most authentic self. That's when you're able to show your true self to the world and help others. It's hard to show the world who you are without reservation. However, true confidence comes when you know exactly who you are because others' opinions just won't matter. I want to thank Ed for joining me on the podcast. You can learn more about Ed by visiting his website at edgarrity.com. Young athletes and parents can find their missing puzzle piece by visiting my website, michaelvhuber.com. Thank you for listening. We'll see you back soon for episode 80.